All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we're going through Proverbs chapter 3, verses 29 through 35. So let's get into it. Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways, for the Lord detests the perverse, but takes the upright into his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. The wise inherit honor, but fools get only shame. So I read a big chunk of verses because I don't really want to be redundant when I'm going through Proverbs. However, Proverbs is very redundant because wisdom and truth can be simple. Not always easy to apply, but simple. So, with that being said, let's get into it. When I read these verses, I thought about the fact that we attribute negative stuff to places where negativity doesn't exist. So when you think about these couple of verses, do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. When we operate in the world, a lot of us have a negative slant, a negative bias towards certain things, and we take that negative bias and we attribute it to other people, other circumstances, and other things. And this is where limiting beliefs and fear can start to take over our life because it affects how we live in our relationships and how we operate in the world, the actions that we take. And people who do these things don't get favor, don't get honor. So when you think about it, when you're always thinking negatively, you're always treating people like they're suspicious of you or you're suspicious of them, you're always expecting the worst out of a situation, what are the things that you get? And a lot of people don't like to talk about the law of attraction. It's really woo-woo, but the Bible actually talks about it a lot. Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe it in your heart that it is yours. Believe it in your heart that it is true and it will be yours, I think is how the verse goes. And this is very similar. It's saying, don't plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Don't accuse people for no reason when they have done you no harm. And then later in the verse it says, the wise inherit honor. And Proverbs is talking about wisdom. And so it's wise not to plot harm against people. It's wise not to accuse people of stuff when they haven't done anything. And when you do this stuff, you will get honor. And then favor is shown to the humble and the oppressed. And earlier I talked about humility being raising your regard for people, not so much lowering your regard of yourself. And they kind of work out to be the same, but I like the idea that you have high self-confidence and you just have a way higher other confidence towards other people, right? And so that's what I got from these verses. And the entrepreneurial application, Elon Musk talks about really clear, realistic thinking being an important skill in entrepreneurship and just being a human in the world. And I think it's the same here in entrepreneurship when you talk about these verses. Don't accuse anybody for no reason. It would be illogical to look at somebody and be like, you did this when they did not do it. So if you don't have a reason to accuse them, don't accuse them. If you don't have a reason to start that business, don't start that business. A lot of people starting businesses and doing things when there's not a problem to be solved. And businesses are meant to solve problems. They're asking for money when they have not provided value. They're expecting stuff when they haven't done the necessary inputs, or they think a insufficient amount of input will lead to an output that they want. And so just that clear thinking, that reasonable thinking, not wishful thinking, I think is what you get here. And it's not a direct correlation because I wouldn't say this is talking about wishful thinking necessarily. But insofar as wishful thinking is wishing for something that's not there, or wishing for a reality that isn't the case, in these verses it talks about you having wishful thinking of like accusing somebody for no reason. Like you want them to be the culprit, but they're not the culprit, and you have no reason to think that. You're plotting harm against your neighbor because you don't trust them, but they trust you. And so it's just all this stuff of like you're making stuff up in your head when it's not true. And so where has this shown up in my life? I would say it's really shown up when I come to just sitting there and I'm like, how do I get to the point where I am not implementing wishful thinking in all that I do? And I have a extreme problem when it comes to not really going out on wishful thinking because I like to be optimistic, and that optimism really drives me to do things that can be wishful at times. It's like that's just not the case. That's not realistic. What are you like thinking about? What are you doing? And so specifically with the podcast, I would say a form of wishful thinking was when I started this podcast, I thought it was going to blow up in 3 months, right? And it didn't do that. I thought it was going to blow up in 6 months. It didn't do that. I thought it was going to blow up in a year, and it didn't do that. It's like steadily improving, steadily increasing, whatever, but it didn't blow up like I thought it was. I thought I'd be rich after posting a daily podcast for a year, right? Wrong. And the question I have to ask myself is, okay, I know people want to go after their dreams and goals. I wouldn't say that's wishful thinking. But saying people like the way I'm putting out content because I like the way I'm putting out content, that may be wishful thinking. And so, to an extent, it's correct insofar that people want to go after their dreams and goals. But am I communicating it properly? That's the biggest place wishful thinking has shown up in my life. And then just the questions I go through, how I seek feedback, and how I seek mentorship, I would say are ways to counteract that wishful thinking. I want to join a real estate group. I want to invest in my businesses. All this came from, I used to want something for nothing, and that desire got quashed because Napoleon Hill is very wise in telling us not to do that. So, where do I want this to show up in my life? Correct thinking about my life. I get so caught up in false negativity, and it's just not the truth. And so, I both want to apply it to my podcast in the sense that I get feedback, and I don't assume people like something because I like it, or assume people don't like something because I don't like it, but also when I am attributing negative realities to circumstances, situations, and people that aren't really there, I want to get rid of that. And I think that really comes from inner work, deep work with yourself, looking at your belief systems, looking at your biases, analyzing them, and then dropping the ones that don't serve you and adopting ones that do serve you. How can you apply this to your life? I'd say the first step is identifying those negative biases. And once you do that, that's when you start to change them, really. You identify them, and when you identify stuff, they really lose a lot of their power because they just don't make sense. And the only reason they can stay like they are is because you choose to neglect them. Shine a little light on them, and they'll start to dissipate. And as they dissipate, you replace them with more positive biases, more abundant biases that will better serve you in the world. So there we go. That's all we got for you guys today on the show. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you on the next one. And on that note, we're out.